Good afternoon to my colleagues, our students, and any guests who have joined us this afternoon. It's my privilege to be sharing on the topic academic research and writing. So, what I'm going to share with you this afternoon is good judgment that was obtained through experience of bad judgment. And what do I mean by that is I have learned from others, even as I've acquired some of these skills myself, and I'm going to pass them on to you. And hopefully, as you apply them this afternoon in your academic writing, you don't have to repeat the mistakes that I did initially and be a better writer straight from out of the bat, or how do we say it? Off the bat. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is look at the outline this afternoon using the words commence, contextualize, conceive, be clear, be concise, be coherent, craft, conclude, and concluding with copy or repeat. Now, if you noticed already, I was applying the first skill that I'm going to be speaking about this afternoon, and that's crafting. In the outline, all of these words are verbs: commence, contextualize, conceive. To make it a verb, I use the words be clear, be concise, be coherent, then craft, conclude, copy. If you notice the alliteration of all the C's, and they're in groups of three. And then the middle three, B, 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 and then the last three. So that's already giving you an idea of when we talk about crafting, what it's going to entail. Robert Collier said, success is the sum of small efforts, repeated day in and day out. And that's kind of the gist of what we're going to be looking at this afternoon. These are habits and principles and skills that I'll be sharing with you. And if you keep on applying them on a daily basis, working at them, improving in them, you will be able to produce a good scholarly work, whether that be a PhD or master's thesis, whether that be an article for publication, whether that would be a report of some sort, but a good academic work because you're applying these skills. So the aim, as we said for this afternoon, is how to write a successful thesis. But as I said, this can extend to academic journal publishing, not just master's and doctoral thesis, but reports of a scholarly nature. The focus is on academic research and writing, particularly the writing part. And the content being considered is theoretical foundations, critical thinking insights, practical strategies, and then tools that you can use. So when we talk about contextualizing, what do I mean by this? Well, this afternoon I'm going to be sharing my insights based on my field of practical theology. I'm a practical theologian, which means I look at a current situation. I will then go and ask what is happening, why is it happening, what does the Bible say about this, and then how can we adjust the current situation to align better with the biblical norms that are presented in the research. And so that means, as a practical theologian, I engage with my brothers and sisters in the subdisciplines of biblical studies to make sure I understand the text correctly. Do I understand what it meant to those people then, and what's the principle that can be extrapolated for today? I discuss this with my brothers and sisters in the field of systematic theology. How has this particular issue or item changed over time? Is it a doctrine? How is this doctrine developed, for example? And then I would also, as a practical theologian, engage with social sciences and look at interdisciplinary studies such as psychology or sociology or cultural anthropology. How do these disciplines help me understand the current situation? Although I'm coming from this location as a speaker this afternoon, I do want to encourage you and let you know that this is generalizable across all the disciplines. These principles can be used in the subdisciplines of biblical studies, systematic theology, and studies in church and society. So conceive. When we're talking about research, it starts with a curiosity, a questioning position or a questioning posture of observing. Give you an example. Mine started when I was about 22. I just got into ministry in a small town in Zanin, and I noticed something. Here I'm the youth pastor, and quite a lot of my contemporaries, other youth pastors, were busy leaving the ministry. And I wondered, why is that the case? And particularly why I started wondering is because when I was conscripted into the military for my national service at the age of 18, I was assigned to the medical corps and studied as what they would call a ops medic, or trained as an ops medic. And you spent 3 months learning a medical field, very basic pharmacology, physiology, etc. And then there was going to be 3 months learning how to do battle as a parabat, jumping out of planes with parachutes. I did the former and not the latter. But the whole thing came about. I realized that the military were training me to keep a soldier alive because it was going to be too expensive to send a doctor onto the battlefield, a doctor who had studied for 7 years. It cost an X amount of money, and so was a lot more valuable, which I understand, than what I was. So my job was just keep the person alive till we can casevac him or her out, or get them to a place where the doctor would be, and have less risk for the doctor. So I started thinking, if that's what the military does for its personnel that are important, what about pastors in the church? They are important. They go through training. They prepare for ministry. They have a calling. So, what is happening here that we are losing pastors? And so, I was looking at my experience of 18, asking these questions at 22, and it was about 20 years later I actually got to answer that through my PhD. So, what I did was I identified a research problem. Now, problem is problematic because most people will say today there doesn't necessarily have to be a problem that you're going to investigate. And so I would pose this question, or sorry, this word, as being more accurate, looking for a research gap or an unaddressed or incomplete issue. In other words, um, in your subdiscipline, in your field, in your topic, what has not been spoken about, or what has been spoken about, but there's more that could be said. There can be added, or another section can come and fill in something. So, in other words, what is that research gap? So, if you're going to have a successful thesis for master's or doctoral, you need to identify a research gap, and you are going to do that through going at the literature, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. So that's very important. The next thing is what Swinton and Mowat indicate as complexifying the issue. Now, this is one of the biggest challenge students have, or folk who are starting on postgraduate research. You're doing your master's, your doctoral, or you're going to be writing an academic article. We skip this step of complexifying. So, what do we mean by that? Swinton and Mart indicated as to be you're looking at an issue, but you realize there's a lot more going on than what you can observe at a first glance. It's nearly the proverbial iceberg where there's a small portion on top, but there's this huge portion at the bottom. And so complexifying says, okay, I see this ice on the top, but I'm aware there's a lot more ice at the bottom. What is that ice? So complexifying is, in my case with my research, why are young people or young pastors leaving the full-time ministry? Um, is it possibly related to the leadership? Is it related to the church? Is it related to the governance style of the church? Is it related to the doctrinal position of the church? Is it related to personality issues? Is it related to the context of the situation? What are all the issues that could be at play in this situation? And so that would be complexifying. That would be taking it and saying, I'm going to unpack it little by little and get to each of the layers of this issue. And then what you would do is you would survey the subdiscipline, the field, and the topic. Now, notice when you are going to become a specialist as a master's and a doctoral student in a specific area, your examiner is normally going to be looking at the following. Do you have a good grasp of the subdiscipline? If you're in biblical studies, do you have a good grasp of the subdiscipline of biblical studies, whether you're in Old Testament or New Testament? If you're in systematic theology, do you have a good grasp of the subdiscipline of systematic theology, what it's about? Can you explain it? Can you give some idea of its origins, its development, its current situation? And the same goes for practical theology. So, are you aware of the broad brush strokes of your subdiscipline? Then the second thing you'd be focusing on is your field. So, for example, in your field, if you in systematic theology, your field might be atonement, your field might be eschatology, your field might be Christology. If you're in practical theology, your field might be pastoral theology, your field might be counseling, your field might be Christian education. And again, the same as for the subdiscipline. Are you a master? Have you mastered your field? Do you understand its origins? Are you aware of its developments? And are you also cognizant of the current debate in that field? And then finally, your topic. In other words, this is where the research gap is very important. What has been the discussion? For example, if it was my subdiscipline of practical theology, I would be aware of Schleiermacher coming all the way through to Nietzsche and then seeing some of the others developing it. My field would be pastoral theology, bordering on ecclesiology, but mostly pastoral theology. I have to work with the clergy. And then my topic is clergy. So, am I aware of the current state of the clergy? Am I aware of what the debates are as far as clergy are concerned? And so that's very important. So when you're conceiving, you're starting with a curiosity, you're looking for the research gap, you're complexifying the issue at hand, and then you are aware of your subdiscipline, your field, and your topic in broad brush strokes. Then, when we consider the preliminary literature review, the way to do this is to scour journal articles, theses, dissertations, especially the references section. Often, what we find in the reference section is the gold. You are mining for the seminal work. What do I mean by seminal? Seminal is the person who was foundational in the creating or the establishing of the field. When we talk about practical theology, it would be Schleiermacher. He's considered the father of practical theology, but by no means the only person. And then you'd be looking for these well-known authors, academic scholars who have set the stage. And then you're also going to be looking for authors in these different sources that are discussing the current debate. Now, one of the things, if you're going to be doing a thesis or a journal article, it is no good that most of your references, when you are using them, are older than 5 years. There's a certain portion that can be, and normally we accept seminal works, works that are of great importance that have affected the field and the topic. But if you're going to be contributing, particularly in practical theology, to a current debate, your references should be predominantly within the last 5 years. Why? Because that's where the current debate is. Now, it might differ in systematic theology and biblical studies, because obviously older references there. But usually we want to see a reasonable amount of newly dated references in your thesis. Also, when you're busy looking at these and for yourself as a researcher, consider the ontological and epistemological presuppositions. You need to ask this of yourself. What is your own research worldview? As well as of the authors that you're inviting into the debate on this specific topic. Now, what do I mean by that? Often I try and picture myself, and Dr. Miller, Candida Miller, also has referred to this more recently, sitting around a table, and I'm busy dialoguing with contemporary, current living authors, scholarly authors, and those who have moved on. And we're all around this imaginary table and we're talking about this topic and we are discussing and asking questions and giving viewpoints and opinions, substantiated, weighty observations. And so, what are these different authors' ontological and epistemological presuppositions? Because that will have affected what they've written, how they've written it, and why they've written it. And then what is your research worldview? For example, when I had to do my doctorate, I considered how do I, as a Christian, find a worldview, or at least a research worldview, that does justice to the fact that I believe there is a real truth, a truth that exists without my acknowledgement of it. And then, so epistemology is how do we know, ontology is the reality of things. So I landed up on a post positivist ontology and a critical realist epistemology, of which some people also say critical realism could be considered ontology as well. But what does critical realism say? It says that there is a truth that exists, a reality that exists even though I do not know of it. Then there's a reality that exists that I can observe. And then there's a reality that exists that I can measure. So what that did for me as a Christian and as a academic, I was able to position myself as someone who believes that truth can be known, although I know I can't know all truth in totality. So very important for you as a researcher. And I find often in contemporary theses and dissertations that students omit writing anything about ontology and epistemology. And these are very important. So if you want to be taken serious as an academic, particularly in practical theology, these two areas should be included in any chapter or dissertation or thesis that you are going to be submitting. Then we talk about theoretical frameworks. Conceive a theoretical framework. Theoretical framework is something that exists at master's level. You're going to use someone else's. At doctoral level, you might use someone else's, but you may also, for example, what do you call it, contribute or adapt a theory or even create a new theory. Now, what are theories? They are ways of looking at the world. Let me explain it this way. The gravity exists. Whether we had a name for it or not, it was working. So Isaac Newton then described it, and we call it the law of gravity. The law of gravity doesn't exist. That construct, that concept doesn't. Gravity exists. The law is a description of gravity. It's an understanding of gravity. So when we talk about a theoretical framework, a theory aims to describe reality, or in some cases, in some disciplines, what reality should look like. But in our discipline, it describes reality. And we adjust theory when the anomalies or the differences become too much that the theory no longer can support it. For example, we had mechanical physics, which was supplanted by quantum physics because of Einstein giving us a better theory to understand physics in that way than the one that existed before with Isaac Newton. So that's to give you an idea. Then we look at models. What are models? Models are a way of looking at something. And for example, one that's used quite often is the bio, psycho, social, and spiritual model within practical theology. Bio referring to biological, which is your physiological, somatic, then psychological, the psyche, the mind, and social has to do with sociology, the interaction between people, relationships, and then spiritual, which, by the way, is very interesting because if I recall correctly, the either United Nations or the World Health Organization finally agreed to update their understanding that it is a biopsychosocial and spiritual model. Spiritual wasn't always included, and that's very important to understand. Then, sorry, I just need to scroll here to see what that says. Then identifying the gap for masters and PhDs. Now, what do we talk about identifying the gap? Well, at master's level, you are contributing something. At doctoral level, you're contributing something new. You are adding to the discussion. So that's very important when we talk about conceiving. So look for the articles, mine those references, like going to a gold mine, find the rock, crush it, find the gold, refine it, and reuse it. Determine what is your ontological and epistemological presupposition. How are you seeing the world as a researcher? What is the theoretical framework that you'll be using? What model could you be using to describe your research? And then remember to identify the contribution that you're going to be making through noting or stating what is the research gap. Then we consider the next step, be clear. So remember, be very detailed, precise, by writing what you mean and meaning what you write. Too often, the challenge as researchers is it makes sense in our minds, and we think others understand what we're saying because it's making sense in our minds. But the problem is, I am not in your mind, and you are not in my mind. Praise God for that, busy as it is. So, what we do at this stage is I normally say to students, I'm not in your church, I'm not in your congregation, I'm not in your community, I'm not in your topic. Will you explain to me, as someone who doesn't know anything, what you mean? Um, I've had students that write and then they assume that I'm going to understand the church's hierarchy, and they write in a cryptic way, but they don't understand that anyone who reads this must be able to say, okay, so this is where this person fits, this is this function, this is what this does. So it's very important to make sure what's in your head is translated onto paper, or at least electronically, into a very clear, coherent, and concise manner. So write what you mean and mean what you write. Here is one of the biggest skills that you can learn today. This point, if you remember nothing else but the one that's following, you will have learned a huge, huge lesson. Excuse me. Everything, nearly, has a beginning, middle, and end. So when we look at sentences, sentences have a beginning and an end, sometimes have a middle. The cat runs. The beginning, the cat. The end, runs. The cat runs fast. Beginning, the cat runs fast, middle. The cat runs fast into the woods. The cat, beginning, runs fast, middle, into the woods, end. Do you see how that sentence has a beginning and end? This is the only one that might not always have a middle. But, excuse me, paragraphs should have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Chapters should have a beginning, a middle, and end. The beginning of a paragraph should set the tone for what the paragraph is going to be about. The middle of the paragraph should elaborate, explain, unpack what it's about. The end of the paragraph brings it to a conclusion or then sets it up for going on to the next paragraph. The same with chapters. When you're concluding your introductory chapter, you might summarize what has happened, and then you say, and now we're going to be looking at the next thing. Same with paragraphs. And so I call that the ninth wonder of the world, transitions. Transitions are like signposts. They help the reader to say, I know where this author is going. I know where this scholar is going. She has said this and this, and now she's directing my attention. We are turning left here, or we are going right over here. Very important. So transitions, if you can remember this, is the ninth wonder of the world. And please, every sentence, paragraph, and chapter to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, with the exception of sentences, as I said. Very important to be clear in your writing. Does your argument flow logically? In other words, does it make sense? Can someone who reads your thesis say, so Shaun is going from A to B to C. And I can see this. Logically, it makes sense. He's building precept upon precept, line upon line, as we read in the Psalms. And is he doing it smoothly? Does it read easily? Does it make sense as I'm busy reading this? One of the other things that you could do in your thesis, very recommended, is vary the sentence length. Have short sentences, medium length sentences, maybe one or two long. Generally, shorter sentences are preferred because they're punchy, to the point, and you don't become too verbose. So very important, vary the sentence length so that there's someone reading it. If you just use short sentences, it's like speaking, to you. Now, not pleasant to do that for a whole thesis. And if you're going to be using long sentences like this all the time during your thesis, it will be very long and monotonous to read it. Obviously, I'm overemphasizing so that you can understand the difference of being punchy and at times having a lengthy sentence. Avoid additional questions where possible, because all of these have to be aligned to your research questions, your main and subsidiary research questions. So the challenge here often is some students I've come across will have their main research question, their 4 to whatever amount subsidiary questions, and then throughout the thesis, they keep on asking questions. But what about this? But what about that? The problem with asking too many questions, other than those that are your research questions, is that each of them have to be answered completely and sufficiently, convincingly. And so, if you reduce the amount of questions you ask and stick to the main research question and the subsidiary questions, and all you do is you focus on answering them, you you remove the possibility of being challenged on that you asked extra questions that were not aligned to the focus of your thesis and that you didn't answer them adequately. So very, very important to remember that. You need to answer all questions sufficiently to be awarded the degree. So make sure you keep those to a minimum. So to summarize, in being clear, does your argument flow logically, smoothly? Do you vary your sentence length? And are you making sure that you only use your main and subsidiary research questions and do not include too many that increase the possibility of you not answering them adequately? So, yeah, the reality and the expectations. I don't know if any of you come across these Danish cookie tins. Oh, they are heavenly. You put them in your mouth and they melt. Well, sometimes when you're busy with your thesis, the reality is that when you open the tin, it's full of cotton threads and bobbins. And then the one on the right, which we do know is taken from the office, and the supervisor saying, "You are known for," and the student saying, "My intelligence, my great ideas." And then the supervisor says, "Procrastinating." And that is one of the challenges, not just for students, but even scholarly. When we're writing academic articles, I must admit, I often have to overcome this inertia of getting to start writing. Once I start writing, very pleasant, but I can find 101 other things to do before I actually start writing. And so do not be known for procrastinating. And if you are, there's always hope. Besides counseling, there are interventions. Okay, so let's look at the next thing. And we are looking at being concise. So when we talk about being concise, avoid redundancy and repetition wherever you can avoid redundancy and repetition to ensure that there's no redundancy and repetition in your thesis except where repetition is necessary. I hope that's driven the point home. I must admit, I've read chapters and theses. I've even done examinations externally for other universities. One of the most challenging situations is when a thesis has already stated its main point in a very coherent way, and the author of the thesis has repeated numerous times the same point. And that makes it difficult because it feels like you're wading through a bog, you're wading through a marsh instead of just lying on your back in a river and letting the current taking you in a very pleasant manner. So please say what you mean what you say, and then do it very concisely. Be sure that in your introduction chapter, you state what you're going to do, in your middle chapters, what you are doing, and your concluding chapter, what you have done. Now, that's interesting because that's basically how journalism operates. You will see an article in a newspaper, besides the headline, the first sentence will basically tell you what this paragraph or the story is about. Then it'll go into unpacking it in the middle, and then in the concluding, it'll leave you with an outcome of it. And so that's kind of a journalistic principle that got into research in a way. Excuse me. So please be concise in your writing Do not repeat unnecessarily. Do not be redundant. Once a point has been driven home, the reader knows you've gone from A to B to C. Move on. The next thing, and it's linked to the previous one. Degrees are not awarded on word counts. Degrees are not awarded on word counts. Say it as succinctly as you can. Remember, the following people will review, examine, or read your thesis. It could be your research proposal reviewer if you're submitting a research proposal. It would be your supervisor and co-supervisor if you have one. It would be the internal examiner. It would be an external examiner, sometimes multiple when you're at PhD level. If you're submitting a journal article to an academic journal for peer review, it's going to be the journal editor, it's going to be the peer reviewers. All of these people are going to be looking at it, and then also other researchers. So what we do want to do is keep attention. We want to say what we mean and mean what we say, and we want to say it clearly, concisely, and coherently in as many words as necessary, not any more. Very, very important. Then, if we continue with this journey, we notice the next thing is that part 3, when we talk about being concise, you don't want to lose the attention of these folk I have just mentioned, whether it's your supervisor, examiners, journal editors, peer reviewers, by being verbose. In other words, just using a lot of words when you could say it very easily. Unnecessarily repetitive, I've mentioned that. And then technically below par concerning the following. Now, what do I mean by technically below par? This is the challenge. When one is reading a thesis and you are overly distracted by spelling mistakes, grammar mistakes, the style and formatting mistakes, inaccuracies in in-text citations and references, what happens is that will detract the person from reading your work, and they'll be more concerned and consumed by that than the actual content that you may be giving, which could be wonderful, but unfortunately, it's not packaged well. So, what is the one thing that you can do as a student, as someone who's going to submit a thesis, or as a researcher, someone who's going to submit a journal article? Firstly, spelling. What can you do with that? Well, you set your word word application that you use, whether it is Microsoft, Google, whatever else. You set that to the spelling required. If it's UK spelling, set it to that. If the journal requires American spelling, set it to that. If you're in South Africa, set it to that. Grammar, very important that you are aware of English grammar. Now, I understand that for some folk, English is their second, third, or fourth language. Just by the way, in case you didn't know, it's actually my second language. And what I've had to learn is to upskill myself in grammar. I would read on it. I would read others who have written well. For example, one of my favorite books to read is Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. There I learned some very good use of grammar, good use of words. I try and find well-written books that I can learn from them. And then SPL style and formatting. Really, we do have the document available. Unfortunately, when someone submits something and the SPL style and formatting is below par, what it really says to me as a supervisor is that the student, in a sense, took my time for granted. And if you really wanted to stretch it, they were disrespectful, because they could have taken the time to accurately capture the in-text citations and the referencing. The document is available. It's not a lack of knowledge. What it is a lack of application. And so when you want to make sure that your thesis is going to get a good grade, a good reading, a good understanding, whether it's master's or doctoral, please make sure that your formatting, style and formatting, particularly in SATs, at SATs, SPL, is correct. And that also goes for accuracy in in-text citations and references. Your supervisor should and would be going through your references, making sure that it works. That's why supervision takes so long, to make sure that you're accurately citing someone, to make sure that, and there have been times when I've clicked on the links on my students' work and it shows an error 404 page, or it says this no longer exists here. And I think, okay, so what has happened since then and where can we find it? And then I would encourage a student to go and look for the accurate, maybe it was a typo and they corrected, or maybe it's been moved to a different page and they update the link, or they might find that that reference is no longer available and they have to substitute it with an alternative reference. So very important, make sure that you're technically on par as far as spelling, grammar, formatting and style and accuracy is concerned. Okay, so be coherent. What do I mean by that? Remember, you are taking the reader on a journey, whether that reader is your supervisor, co-supervisor, whether it's the internal examiner, the external examiner, a journal art editor or a peer reviewer. You are taking the reader on a journey, and make sure that he or she knows where you're coming from, where you are, and where you're going. And remember, I've said this before, what is in your head is not in everyone else's. You need to be explicit. Words such as approximately or about is not helpful in a thesis. You cannot state, I interviewed approximately 3 people. You either interviewed 3 people or you didn't. You either interviewed 5 or you didn't. Be very specific, precise. You either did read these texts if you're in biblical studies. You either did consult these commentaries or you didn't. You either did follow the trajectory of this doctrine in systematic theology or you didn't. Very important. So my question to you would be, can you explain or give directions for the journey you're on? If someone said to you, can you tell me how your thesis progresses from its inception to its conclusion? Are you able to succinctly, in a few sentences, say, I start here, I address this and this because of this gap, I do it in this way, and I found these conclusions or these findings, and this is my conclusion? Very important. Can you, in even layman's terms, share that with someone, and then obviously translate it into academic writing? But that's important, to be able to share your journey, your research findings very coherently. It must make sense. Then, number 7, craft. Now, this is very, very important. You are not reading a lot of information. This reminds me, just a little tangent. Not everything you read has to be in your thesis. You are going to select what you're going to put in your thesis. Everything you read is helpful for you as a human being, as a person in your development. Your brain is making connections, you're thinking through things, but not everything is necessary to answer the research question you've posed. So you are selective in what you are quoting and inserting into your thesis. But how do you craft? How do you craft your thesis? First, you write. There's nothing to correct, there's nothing to craft if you haven't written. So you have to start by looking at that blank page on your screen or the blank page on paper, if that's the mode you use, and you have to write. You have to write in the beginning. And then after you've done that, you need to rewrite ad nauseum, which means until you feel sick about it. And you notice I use the superscript number 2 there to say that is exponential. I cannot tell you what emotional distress I go through when I sometimes have to delete a whole paragraph that I've crafted because I don't think it fits with the research anymore. It doesn't assist. Then I will take it out, I'll put it into another document, a notes document. I'm an intellectual hoarder. I keep everything I've made notes on electronically, and I'll put it there, kind of sussing my mind, saying, relax, Shaun, it's there if you need to get it. But I do not include it if it does not add to the argument, if I cannot coherently state how this is adding to the journey for the reader. So write, 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 rewrite, rewrite, rewrite. Now, something my music teacher in Zanin taught me, I took classical guitar, uh, practical for about three grades, and theory for about 2 grades. And she said something very interesting. She said, Shaun, practice makes permanent, but perfect practice makes perfect. So, what did she mean? She said that I could practice the musical piece and do it incorrectly and it would be permanent. But if I did it correctly, I would remember it correctly. So, when you're crafting, practice the good skills. The skills, as I've mentioned before in this presentation, and as you practice them more and more, eventually you'll become perfect at them or near perfection. Then eat your own elephant. Stay focused. The challenge is often I've heard it said, um, eat the elephant one bite at a time. And then one day I was thinking about this and I thought, well, I could be eating this elephant one bite at a time. But what if I got to the end of the elephant and found out mine is still over there on the plate and yours is finished? I've eaten the wrong elephant. So please stick to your concept, stick to your focus, stick to your research question. Don't answer every question. Stick to yours. Eat your elephant. And then research is present tense. It's an ongoing debate around the table with conversation partners who are both living and passed on, as I said previously. I'm going to speed this up quickly. When we talk about crafting, one of the biggest skills or helpful skills that you could acquire is writing in active voice, present tense writing. So those are phrases that I've coined, obviously based on a reality here. What do I mean by that? So this is what I come across in quite a few chapters in practical theology, and I'm going to quote and read the yellow part. According to Smith, 2020-15, page 15, the sky is blue. According to Manyika, 2021, page 16, the sky is sometimes tinted red. According to Malherbe, 2022, page 17, it becomes red-like because of pollution. However, Nseno, 2023, page 18, indicates that people who see a red sky need to have their eyes tested because it could be an eyesight problem. Now, that doesn't show me that you are a master or a doctor who is specialized in your writing. That shows me that you can quote other authors and you've kind of engaged in a discussion between them. When we talk about present tense active voice, that same paragraph in the blue would read as following at the bottom of the screen. The sky is blue, yet sometimes tinted red because of pollution. However, the perceived red tint may be related to an eye condition. And each of these authors we can see from the in-text citation, are the originators of the thought. But I am speaking as someone who's becoming a specialist in my field, and I'm speaking with authority. So that's what I mean by active voice present tense writing. That doesn't mean we can't use according to in some places, but that should not be the predominant part of your thesis. Then use of synonyms and certain phrases. Yes, you can also use synonym, but these are synonyms and certain phrases. Concerning instead of with regards to is a good synonym to use. We conduct research. We don't do research. We conduct experiments. We don't do experiments. And such as is also a very good filler instead of like. Using doesn't mean you can't use like, it doesn't mean you can't use with regards to, but it's a good craftsmanship to learn to use other phrases and words and increase your skill of these in being able to communicate your research gap that is being filled. So as I said before, you're becoming a master of your subdiscipline, your field and your topic, and you're showing that you can conduct independent research. So when examiners look at your thesis, this is what they're going to look at. They're going to say, has Shaun become a specialist in the area of practical theology, in the field of pastoral theology, in the topic of clergy well-being? And can he conduct research on his own and do it from beginning to end, research design with accurate findings, and then convey it in a very acceptable or a helpful manner as an academic? Coming to the conclusion, remember, don't skimp or take shortcuts over here. So often I've come to the end of a chapter, or I've come to the end of a thesis. We get to chapter 5, which is the fourth task of Osmond, for example, strategies. And it feels like the student has been running a race and they went full out. And in the last 100 meters, they no longer have energy to complete the race. You know, the blood is drained from their heads and their body, and now they're just praying to God that the end of the thesis can come. And so it feels like this great story has been told with a good introduction. We got the protagonist, the antagonist, we got a plot, we got a storyline, everything, and you get to the last sentence, and it's the butler did it. Well, that's not helpful. What you want to do is end well. You want to really end well, as you started well and you continued in the middle. So answer the research questions and leave the reader satisfied. Whether that's your supervisor or examiner, let her or him say, yes, this student has been able to pose a question as well as answer it in a sufficient, adequate manner. And then copy, repeat. So remember, when I say copy, I don't refer to plagiarism. Never. So plagiarism is the unethical practice of citing another's work as your own, whether you're plagiarizing someone else or your own previous work without citing that you used it somewhere. Plagiarism is unacceptable, whether it's unintentional, ignorantly done. Never. As academics, as scholars, as researchers, as students, we know wherever you obtained a thought, a construct, a concept, an idea, a sentence, a quote, you have to cite who said it. Now, in practical theology, particularly with my students, what I try and encourage them to do is please do not just cite years. According to, if you're going to do emerging adults and you're considering the life stages by Arnett or Cote or even Erickson, please don't put Cote's 2020 work or Arnett's 2019 work. It's important, if you're referring to something specific, state on this page or this page range from page 7 to 9 or this chapter, so that the reader has an idea that you are not thumb sucking this, you read it somewhere and you just decided to quote it. It actually exists somewhere, and for them to find it, it's going to be so easy because they can turn to that page, they can turn to those 3 pages. You might say, Shaun, what if it's a book that deals on the topic? I'm telling you, there's going to be a sentence or there's going to be a paragraph that summarizes that whole book. Quote that paragraph, quote that page. Okay, so when I say copy, refers to wash, rinse, repeat. In other words, if you're going to be a good scholar, apply all of these principles, those of writing, conceiving, contextualizing, crafting. And then there's also other resources that you can use to find information. The usual is Google Scholar, the journal subscriptions, for example, SATS journal subscriptions, the Atlas database, the Premier database, those kind of things. But then also what I found of late, and this has really helped me, is I subscribe, and Twitter is my default news headlines platform. I enjoy it greatly. I subscribe to academic persona, people who publish academic sources and resources for me to use. I've learned quite a lot on a few of them. And if you do follow me on Twitter, you'd be able to see who it is that I follow. I follow people who in the academic sphere talk about AI and the ethical, helpful use of it. ChatGTP is not the best use. You, for example, do not know about Site.ai or Reword. Those are academically robust and AI platforms. You can use that, and of course, in an ethical manner. I've also, strangely enough, found some TikTok academic sources that's helpful, and then YouTube academic sources. Even this morning, I was busy watching a short 3-minute video from the Nazarene College on practical theology. So don't just think that there's only the usual places. There are other places. Don't cite Twitter. Don't say according to tweet 4138, according to TikTok video 43. Don't do that. Use them to find the gold. You're mining them for the resources. I'd like to conclude with this quote by Jim Ryan. Motivation is what gets you started. Habit is what keeps you going. Thank you very much.